Daniel Sparks. Good morning, Daniel. How are you, sir?
Good morning. I'm proud it works in Belmont, Mississippi.
Oh, it does work in Belmont. It's a progressive little town that continues to grow. But what's the population of Belmont?
We hover right around 2,000 in the city of Belmont.
Used to be that if you were 2,000, this comes from public education, Shaw High School many years ago. Wasn't 2,000 the benchmark for where you could call yourself a city?
I believe that's correct. We were.
Do you think that still is the number? I'm not sure.
I think it maybe there's a town, village, and city and designation.
Right.
Of course, we had one red light growing up as the top of the hill on Highway 25 and Main Street, and MDOT came out to count the traffic, and we wanted to keep our red light. So I was a teenager, and we just continually circled and drove over the counter, but we didn't get to keep it. It's a four-way stop. So
we did that also out in the front yard. We were the first farm at the edge of town, and they put a thing across the gravel road, and we went out and just stomped it forever.
Right.
And it must have worked. Only 15 years later, we got a paved road out there. Yeah, but it was good. The paved road was good because we could follow the DDT truck on the mosquito thing.
That's right.
Without hurting our feet too much barefooted.
That's exactly right.
Jeez, come on. The session was a memorable session. I know you were involved in numerous different ways, but any specific bills that you had that made it all the way through?
Yes, we had. I had some good success. I felt like this session, working together with both ends of the hall, and the first one that kind of came out quickly, we had a bill that dealt with Mississippi Realtors, licensees, the Real Estate Commission, that dealt with the disciplinary matters and due process and notice, and that went through the first couple of weeks. We had passed it the year before, and I had a veto, and the governor wanted the parties to kind of get together, and we tried to do that, and then ultimately we passed some legislation. And I think we're going to build off of that, because one of the things that concerns me, we try to be a pro-business state. We talk about taxes and regulation and things, but it's sometimes agency government interferes with business startup, or they'll let you get a license, but they won't let you grow, or there's things of that nature. So I think we're going to look at a lot of how we govern our licensees, some things that maybe don't need to be licensed, or if they are, maybe there should be a standard operating procedure, if you will, a licensee's Bill of Rights. I think we need to have some streamlining as it relates to allowing people to make a living in this state and allow them to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah, we're making inroads on that one, and all the way down to the con process, the certificate of need. Somewhere down the line, we're going to have to take care of this, and I know that we covered that many times in different other different programs. But all of the certifications and duplicity and everything else, we're slowly but surely getting it out of it. And I don't want to harp on this, but you have to understand the Republicans have not been in power that long in the scope of how long the Democrats have been in power. As I always said, they formed the laws, the foundation, and what we see here is mostly put together by Democrat power over the many, many decades. That being said, it is changing and rather quickly. Kudos as far as the personal income tax, because I was glad to see that come together.
Yes, and it was, that was a collaborative effort, obviously, over a couple of years. And, Chairman Harkins on our end, certainly worked very hard to try to come together with something that was conservative and effective. And one of the things you look at today, you saw the inflation indicators continue to go up,
Yep.
and interest rates half a basis point yesterday. And that was some of the statements, I think, coming from the Lieutenant Governor, coming from Chairman Harkins, and from the Senate side, and I felt that way myself, is that we had to be very concerned about what was going to happen in the short term with interest rates and inflation, and how we factored that into what we needed to do in the tax situation. We want less and less tax burden, but we have to function in government. And being able to get the ARPA monies out timely is huge as it relates to, once again, inflationary pressures and loss of buying power. So that was good. We did some things that I think are long term impactful, and one of those is the income tax reduction.
Mm-hmm. You're, as a noted attorney, I think one of the top stories in the state, because everybody's affected by what goes on in Jackson, but it's not only Jackson. If I look at the police blotter this morning, and as an attorney, you know this well, Clay County Sheriff's Office this week arrested 19-year-old Emerson Houston, 2 17-year-old boys, and a 15-year-old boy, all from West Point. March 11th death of Michael Craven, 41 years old. Investigators said Craven was found in a ditch with gunshot wounds. They said they allegedly intended to rob him. The judge denied bond. Well, all three are charged as adult with capital murder. Only 19-year-old Houston could be facing the death penalty. But that's just story number one. There's the police blotter. We have stories all over the state, from the Gulf Coast to the Tennessee line. Just I don't know how the court system can take care of this. I was looking at one story, and hang on here. I think I saw the backlog in the Jackson. Here it goes here. Hinds County, home to Jackson, of course, has more than 2,700 open cases as of this week. How do you possibly climb that mountain?
Well, one step at a time. We took one of those steps yesterday. I think you've probably covered the where the several members, Lieutenant Governor, Hinds County Sheriff, DA, Speaker of the House, were at the Capitol yesterday along with other Hinds County leaders, in addressing that the legislature had appropriated sums of money for hopefully a temporary relief to begin to try to climb that mountain for judges, for assistant district attorneys, and for public defenders, because you have to process these cases. Obviously, we speak many times of the Constitution, and I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, and I'm believing the rights that we have that are contained in there, and a lot of those have to do with the criminal law. But you have to go through the criminal justice process. And I know we'll talk a little bit about Department of Corrections, but there is a difference between the criminal justice process and then what happens in the Department of Corrections. And the Department of Corrections are not getting them. You've got the people at these ages, and it's so troubling because the level of violence seems to rise and the age seems to be going down. And it's a function of broken families. It's a function of broken communities, lack of parenting. I mean, it's so many things that gets us there. But to see people at that age that are committing that kind of hardened crime is very concerning, and it is. It's all over the state. But that's one of the things in Hinds County, and I hope to see immediate results with that. We're obviously going to continue to look at how we deal with the Capitol Complex District and what may come there with Capitol Police. We do need more law enforcement on the ground in Hinds County and the city of Jackson. I don't think anyone doubts that. But we need to prosecute the people that are arrested. That's that's part of the deal.
You go back and you see where the mayor of the city of Jackson has not been that responsive in the past. Certainly wasn't for 4 long years when Trump was in office. He shunned Trump when he came to the Civil Rights Museum. And I think the Republicans were willing to do anything they could, probably to fund some more police on the streets. But he snubbed his nose and just turned his back on that. Some of the meetings that were scheduled, even with the U.S. Attorney from the Southern District, Mike Hurst, he never attended the meetings. There were so many bits and pieces of evidence like that is so disheartening. But Daniel, here's the problem. Every time we have a press conference, it's held usually to tackle crime problems in Jackson when we have another shooting out there. And it reminds me a little bit of what we used to do in the Delta. Every time that there was another report on poverty, we'd have another committee get together and have a study on poverty in the Mississippi Delta. I mean, if this was a dam and we lost 152 people drowned last year, that's how many people were killed in Jackson. And we drowned 152 people because the dam was leaking, and has been over the years. And every time another person drowns, we have another meeting to talk about tackling this. That shooting didn't begin the crime wave. This has been happening not only in Jackson, but across the entire state for a while. And we failed to handle this thing, and people are aggravated. As far as 2,700 cases sitting there, we as just taxpayers ask, how many of these people on the streets committing the crimes again? As far as the Constitution you were talking about, justice to be quick, where does that fit in on this one? Where are these people being kept? All of these different questions, and I got to tell you, the people of the state of Mississippi are getting aggravated and dismayed, all except the people in Jackson. They keep voting for the same ones. We'll talk more about this when we come back with Daniel Sparks, Senator, Mississippi District 5, right after this. I have a couple of sound bites here that back to the mud bug thing. This is the sheriff and I think the governor. By the way, this is the actual sounds, gunfire, where these kids, 15, 16, 17 year old, however old they were, all of them, 15, 16, 17 years old, I believe, and this is rifle, the AR-type rifles.
Their quick action and quick response to me,
Sheriff Tyree,
in my opinion, and based on the footage of the video surveillance, shows that they prevented more injuries and or deaths from being reported at that particular location. The only thing that we can say is that there were several individuals that were firing weapons. We believe at some point they may have been firing weapons at one another, as well as in the direction of the Midway area of the fairgrounds as well.
Put them in jail and make sure that their sentencing is appropriate and that they stay in jail for a long, long time. It's not the time for any politician to say anything other than what can we do to work together to get this violent crime under control.
Just amazing. And once you see the video and everything, you have to kind of agree with Sheriff Tyree that it could have been a hell of a lot worse with all those people gathered there. And then the mayor himself had, let's see, this comment out there.
The city operates numerous events each year, and this is certainly a deviation from what we see. But I believe that our city is safe. Most instances of violence that we see in our city are those that are interpersonal. They aren't random. The evidence and the facts and the history demonstrate that this is a very rare occurrence for random people to be placed in the line of danger.
God, Senator, you got to wonder what planet this guy is on. The city of Jackson is safe. It's number one per population in homicides in the United States of America.
Well, he's singing from a different hymn book than most everybody else is looking at. Because
he's singing from a different religion.
It's an issue, when you have, I guess, a gated neighborhood, a gated home, and personal security, maybe you do feel a little safer. But for the rest of the people who live in Jackson, it's not very safe right now. And the concern is it's a valuation of life. It is the fact that people are willing to take your life over a cell phone or over trying to rob you or take from you. And it's not that white collar crime or fraud or things like that is a lesser theft. We're talking about crimes against the person, that someone is willing to shoot you and kill you just to see what you have on you. And and unfortunately, it's been out there too much. But I think it goes back to a failure to value life. I think that goes back to a spiritual foundation. I think you don't appreciate the value. And then I think it goes back to abortion on demand. Yeah. When we just show the disregard for life, and then we're shocked when people actually continue to follow that pathway. Mm-hmm. And, of course, today being the National Day of Prayer and the discussion that we have around the decision with the Dobbs case and Roe v. Wade potentially being overturned and things of that nature, those are steps, in my opinion, in the right direction. And I know a lot of people are throwing their hands up in the air saying, well, what about this or what about that? The concern is in this country, and particularly in certain areas, we have a complete disregard for law and order. Yeah. We have a complete disregard for safety of others and life. And we have to get that back. And, our law enforcement people live in this every day. They have to go out into this every day. The mayor referenced interpersonal relationships. Some of the most dangerous things that happen for law enforcement are responses to domestic events, because the emotions are already heightened. But this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about in Jackson is when you pull up to go into a restaurant and you go inside, and before you can get in the front door, your window's knocked out because somebody's trying to go through your vehicle and maybe find a gun particularly. Mm-hmm. And that happened twice in the last week of the session. 2 senators, 2 people from the state of Mississippi who were here in Jackson serving, 2 windows knocked out in the same week. So don't tell me Jackson's safe. This happened in front of 2 restaurants downtown.
It's kind of a stupid statement, to be honest with you, because if it's an interpersonal relationship and you happen to be in the middle of a crowd, we're not insulated because they're personal.
Sure, that's right.
I would think most gang shootings are interpersonal relationship one way or the other.
That's right.
But the other part of that is this, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on this one too, is that we've heard people talking about some of these AP story and other stories I see is because crime, because of the pandemic, because of this. We don't care. It's almost like somebody breaking into your house with a gun is going to shoot you. Do we worry about how they got in at that particular time, or what the reasoning is that caused them to break into somebody's house? We want to take care of the perpetrator, either shoot them, disarm them, something. And that's where we are now. We can worry about how this happened. We know it's generational with families and everything else. But what we need to do is take care of the criminals on the streets. And I don't think anybody has a solution to that other than now we'll finally start talking about the court system. Let me ask you this, and I don't think I've ever asked this, and frankly, I do not know what the schematic is. Being that you're on corrections, how do the juvenile facilities figure in under the domain of the Department of Corrections?
Well, it's very difficult, I guess, to a certain degree, because if they're true juvenile facilities, often that is handled through youth court, and that is not being addressed by MDOC, and what level of crime you get to. At some point, you have to be certified to be tried as an adult. And you've mentioned 15, 17, all of those ages. And I think maybe in the news article you mentioned that they were going to actually be tried as an adult.
Yeah.
Now, those folks would go into MDOC custody, and there is a facility, as I understand it, that you would house someone that is considered a juvenile until they reach the age of majority, if that's the case. But most of this stuff is being handled in our local counties, because the early indicators, the crimes that are there when someone's 13, 14, 15 years old, they're usually not going to the circuit court. They're going to youth court, which that's what the law says. And maybe that's something we need to look at as legislature, say, what can we do early on?
We've brought that up many years ago. Not enough funding for youth courts, not enough youth courts.
And I think that's something that we're going to have to focus on. And it's a shame, because, the role of government, one of the key roles of government is for the safety of the citizenry. And we're in an unfortunate situation where we're having to spend way too much money on the court system, on law enforcement, and on corrections, and that's disheartening. Right. It is.
Of those 2,700 open court cases, I mean, how many of those are under the adult level? Do we have any idea? We have any. No, this is just in Jackson. Right. That's out of your domain. I'm asking.
I don't think that's okay. But I mean, just based on some of the news articles we read, you've got to believe it's a healthy portion of them, because unfortunately,
do we need to do something with juvenile? And I don't know how many juvenile facilities we have in this state. Do you?
I do not. As far as juvenile facilities, and again, it would be. Some would be MDOC related, some would not be. They would be the local. But I think you go back to the gang environment you mentioned earlier. Criminals are very smart in a lot of ways, in that they're going to have the younger people committing the more violent crimes because the punishment against them is lesser. And we've seen that ramp up in the last several years, is that if you're a younger member, you go commit an act, you get a lesser punishment. And so the leadership in the gang would go that route. But when you start trying to clear that caseload, and they brought on, additional public defenders, because each of these people have to have an attorney. And I am a public defender in a couple different jurisdictions and have been. And, that person who's committed that crime, they need to meet with counsel, because they need to know what their options are, and you have to process the case. You have to get it through the crime lab. We've got issues there. If someone's been killed or there's some forensic issue, you can't proceed on that. You can't even proceed to get an indictment until you get the information back from the crime lab. So that has to happen. Yeah. Then once they're indicted, they need to have counsel. You need to be able to get in front of a judge, and the judge needs to push the envelope, and the DA needs to say, gentlemen, we've got our information. We've got our indictment. You've had discovery. Now you're either going to have a trial or we're going to enter a plea agreement, and you just have to push that along. You can't just let it drag.
If we don't do what we need to do, though, I mean, this is going to continue, and it's just getting worse and worse. So, another question here. In the state of Mississippi, is it lawful for a police officer, sheriff, deputy, constable, whatever it happens to be, to stop and do a driver's license check?
Well, there is an ability to, first of all, to pull someone over for any driving infraction that you see.
Well, no.
But
That's
as
a
to
driving
checkpoint,
infraction.
if you're talking
we
about
used to have checkpoints to check driver's license.
Checkpoints are allowed. They're not called roadblocks. They're called checkpoints, and there is Michigan v. SITS is the guidance from the federal level.
So you could go into the high crime areas of the city of Jackson, Mississippi, and where there is a bottleneck road where somebody can get in, can't get out. And you can do a license check, and it's perfectly legal to do so.
That's correct. Can't do it for general law enforcement purposes, but you can for specific things like license, insurance, things that are required of everybody on the highway.
Can you ask if a gun's in the vehicle?
I think you could ask. They could tell you it's none of your business, or they could say the Second Amendment says I can have it. But I think if you have that, you eventually, law enforcement's smart enough to know how to work to develop probable cause if they believe it's needed.